Picture this, a 19-year-old kid wearing his favorite Grateful Dead t-shirt climbs into a stranger's van somewhere along the East Coast. He's following the music, chasing freedom, living the life of a wanderer. Just hours later, that van slams into a tree at a highway speed. Both young men inside die instantly. One is identified immediately. The other, he becomes a nameless ghost. For 20 years, he's buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten by everyone except the family who never stopped wondering where he went. His face is destroyed beyond recognition. No wallet, no ID, just 2 concert ticket stubs in his pocket and a handwritten note that says, Jason, 20 years. And then one day, half a world away, a woman in Australia who's never met him, never been to America, decides she can't let him stay forgotten. She creates a subreddit, posts his case online, and everything changes. This is the power we hold in our hands right now. The phones in our pockets, the apps we scroll through mindlessly, the communities we build in digital spaces. They're not just tools for entertainment or connection anymore. They've become weapons against injustice. They've become voices for the voiceless. They've become grave diggers of truth, unearthing secrets that have been buried for decades. Welcome to Criminal Minds Archives, where we dive deep into the cases that haunt us, the mysteries that won't let go, and the moments when justice finally breaks through the darkness. I'm your host, and today we're exploring something extraordinary. 5 times when ordinary people, armed with nothing but curiosity and an internet connection, helped solve cases that had stumped professional investigators for decades. These aren't stories about DNA breakthroughs or new forensic technology. These are stories about Reddit users, Facebook sleuths, Twitter detectives, and online communities who refuse to let the dead be forgotten. They're stories about the democratization of justice in the digital age. And they're stories about what happens when thousands of people decide that one person's life matters enough to fight for. Before we begin, if you're passionate about true crime and want to support our mission to tell these stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release new deep dive investigations every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what we have coming up. And here's a promise. If you stay until the very end of this video, I'm going to share something that will fundamentally change how you think about your role in solving cold cases. Something that could turn you from a passive viewer into an active participant in the pursuit of justice. It's not what you think, and it's more powerful than you can imagine. Now, let's dive into our first case. June 26, 1995, Emporia, Virginia, Route 58 West. The sun beats down on an arrow-straight stretch of highway cutting through farmland. At 1:30 in the afternoon, a blue Volkswagen Vanagon drifts across the center line. No braking, no swerving. Just a slow, deadly drift that ends with the sickening crunch of metal against wood as the van slams into a pair of oak trees. Inside, 2 young men die on impact. Neither wore a seatbelt. The driver, 21-year-old Michael Hager, is identified quickly. His family claims his body. They grieve, they bury him. Life for them eventually moves forward. But the passenger, the kid in the back of the van, nobody knows who he is. The medical examiner photographs what's left of his face, but the injuries are catastrophic. Massive lacerations, facial bones shattered. The features that would have made him recognizable to his mother, his sister, his friends, all destroyed in an instant of violent physics. They can't show those photos to the public. Instead, they commission facial reconstructions, those eerie computer-generated images that never quite capture the life that once animated a human face. Here's what they know. White male, somewhere between 15 and 21 years old. Long, curly brown hair that had been dyed reddish. About 5'10", maybe 6 feet tall, 160 pounds, amateur tattoos, a star on his upper left arm, another faded mark on his right, a beaded necklace around his neck. His left ear pierced, though he wasn't wearing an earring when he died. And he was wearing that Grateful Dead t-shirt, red tie-dyed from their summer 1995 tour. Levi's jeans, white socks, black Fila running shoes. In his pockets, 2 scalped tickets to Grateful Dead concerts at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C., June 24th, 1994. June 25th, 1995. $1 in quarters, a yellow Bic lighter, and most hauntingly, a handwritten note that reads, "Jason, sorry we had to go. See you around. Call me," followed by a phone number with a 914 area code. Jason, finally a name. Except it's not really a name, is it? It's a ghost of a name. A whisper. A maybe. Investigators try everything. They run his fingerprints through every database they can access. Nothing. They show the reconstructions to Hager's family, hoping maybe the driver had mentioned picking someone up, giving someone a ride. The family says they've never seen him before. In fact, a detective later clarifies that Hager was alone when he stopped to visit his father in Williamsburg earlier that day, which means he must have picked up this mysterious passenger somewhere between Fairfax and Gloucester, Virginia. They call that phone number from the note. It goes nowhere. Dead end. They release the case details to the media. Local news runs the story. A few papers pick it up, but in 1995, the internet is still in its infancy. There's no viral spread of information, no social media to amplify the signal. The story fades from the news cycle within days. And so the young man is buried in an unmarked grave. No name, no ceremony. Just another John Doe in a potter's field, one of thousands of unidentified dead across America who slipped through the cracks of our collective memory. They give him a case number, 123526. And because of that Grateful Dead t-shirt, because of those concert tickets, investigators start calling him Jason Doe. Eventually, the internet gives him a more poetic name, Grateful Doe. For years, nothing happens. The case file gathers dust. The original investigators retire or move on to other cases. Michael Hager's family grieves and heals and rebuilds their lives. And somewhere, someone is missing this boy, this young man, this person who had a name and a history and people who loved him. But they don't know he's dead. They don't know he's lying in an unmarked grave in Virginia. Maybe they think he's just living his life somewhere, following the Grateful Dead around the country like thousands of other young people did in the 90s. Maybe they're angry at him for not calling. Maybe they're worried. Maybe they've made peace with his absence. Time passes. 1995 becomes 2000. 2000 becomes 2005. And then something begins to change in how we approach these forgotten cases. Websites start appearing. Websleuths. The Doe Network. Forums dedicated to unidentified remains and missing persons. Armchair detectives, regular people with day jobs and families and lives, start spending their evenings scrolling through databases of the lost and the found, trying to make matches that professional investigators missed. And then, in December 2014, a woman named Layla Betts, living in Queensland, Australia, discovers the Grateful Doe case. Layla is 28 years old. She's never been to America. She's never met Jason Doe. But something about his case grabs her and won't let go. Maybe it's the tragedy of dying so young. Maybe it's the injustice of being nameless when someone, somewhere, must be missing him. Maybe it's just that fundamental human instinct to not let another human being be forgotten. Whatever the reason, Layla decides to act. She creates a subreddit, Grateful Doe, a digital space dedicated entirely to solving this one case. And she starts posting updates, reconstructions, details, theories. She becomes obsessed in the best possible way, spending 12 hours a day moderating the community, replying to comments, contacting law enforcement, keeping the case alive in the public consciousness. And people respond. The subreddit grows, hundreds of members, then thousands, all of them looking at the same forensic reconstructions, reading the same case details, wondering the same question. Who is this person? In January 2015, Layla posts a series of composite sketches to the subreddit, updated reconstructions that show what the Grateful Doe might have looked like when he was alive. They're hauntingly detailed. Brown eyes, that curly hair, the kind of face you might see in any high school yearbook from the 90s. And then one day, a message appears in Layla's Reddit inbox. It's from a user named Steve, and Steve says something that changes everything. I think I know who that is. Steve explains that he used to have a roommate back in Illinois, sometime between 1994 and then early 1995. A young guy, kind of a hippie, absolutely obsessed with the Grateful Dead. His name was Jason Callahan. And one day, Jason just disappeared, moved out without saying much, left some phone charges for 900 numbers, hotlines for Grateful Dead fans trying to get concert information and connect with other fans following the tour. Steve hasn't thought about Jason in years, but these reconstructions, the timeline, the Grateful Dead connection, it all fits. Steve sends Layla photographs, old pictures from when Jason lived with him, and when Layla sees them, her heart must have stopped, because the young man in those photographs looks exactly like the forensic reconstructions of Grateful Doe. Now comes the hard part, finding Jason Callahan's family, confirming the identity, convincing law enforcement to take this Reddit tip seriously. The photographs make their way to Facebook groups dedicated to unidentified remains. They spread across the internet, and eventually they reach Shannon Callahan, Jason's half-sister, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Shannon later tells investigators, "I honestly started shaking. When I looked at that picture, it looked like my dad was looking back at me. He had the same face, and he even had a lot of my facial features, my forehead and the shape of my face. I knew in that moment, deep down, that that was Jason. But knowing in your heart and proving in a lab are two different things." Shannon offers to take a DNA test. Law enforcement agrees to proceed, and then comes the waiting. Weeks turn into months. The entire online community of sleuths who've invested themselves in this case holds its collective breath. On January 11th, 2015, Margaretta Evans, Jason's mother, who had been searching for her son for 20 years, files an official missing persons report with the Myrtle Beach police. She explains why she never filed one before. Jason had a history of following the Grateful Dead. He was nomadic, like so many young fans of the band. She thought he'd just estranged himself from the family, that he'd call when he was ready, and she didn't know which jurisdiction to report him to, since she had no idea where he'd gone when he left Florida in June 1995. She attempted to report it when he went missing, but didn't know which jurisdiction to report it to. Lieutenant Joey Crosby of the Myrtle Beach Police explained, "It's in the infancy stages of the investigation. We're still trying to piece everything together." And then on December 9th, 2015, 20 years, 5 months, and 13 days after his death, the DNA results come back. Positive match. Grateful Doe is Jason Patrick Callahan, 19 years old when he died, born April 18th, 1976, in Atlanta, Georgia. Last seen leaving his mother's home in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, in June 1995 to follow the Grateful Dead on tour. He was hitchhiking, living the dream of 1,000 young people who dropped everything to chase the music. And somewhere along Route 58 in Virginia, he climbed into Michael Hager's van. Maybe Hager agreed to give him a ride because they were both deadheads, both wearing tie-dye, both part of that nomadic community of music lovers. Maybe they talked about the shows they'd seen, the songs they loved. Maybe they became friends in the few hours they had together. And then Hager fell asleep at the wheel. No drugs, no alcohol, just fatigue, and in an instant, 2 young lives ended. When the identification was announced, Layla Betts, the Australian woman who started it all, wrote, "It was a very sobering moment, because at that moment, it wasn't that this case had been solved after 20 years. It was that Jason Callahan was finally going to go home. His family had a resolution." Shannon Callahan told reporters, "Had I not found the post and Reddit pages in January, I would have never known that my brother Jason was still missing, or what happened to him." Think about that. Jason's own sister didn't know he was dead. She didn't know he was buried in Virginia. She didn't know that for 20 years her brother had been lying in an unmarked grave, forgotten by everyone except the strangers on the internet who refused to let him stay nameless. The RR Grateful Doe subreddit still exists today. After solving Jason's case, the community pivoted to other unidentified remains. They've helped solve several more cases, giving names back to the nameless, giving closure to families who had given up hope. Jason Patrick Callahan's story shows us something profound about the power of collective action in the digital age. One woman halfway around the world decided that a nameless dead teenager mattered. She built a community. That community persevered. and 20 years of mystery ended because thousands of strangers decided that Jason deserved to be remembered. His story is tragic, but it's also beautiful, because it proves that in a world of billions of people, one life can still matter enough for thousands to fight for justice. And that's just the beginning. Coming up next, what happens when a grandmother is killed by a hit-and-run driver and the only evidence is a piece of black plastic the size of your palm? Stay tuned for Case 2, where a Maryland vehicle inspector scrolling Reddit on his lunch break becomes the key to solving a brutal crime. But first, let me remind you, if you're finding value in these stories, hit that like button and subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives. We're building a community of people who believe that every victim deserves justice and every cold case deserves a second look. Join us. From a 20-year mystery to a case solved in less than a week, sometimes justice doesn't take decades. Sometimes it takes a grandmother, a bicycle, a piece of black plastic the size of your palm, and a vehicle inspector scrolling through Reddit on his lunch break. Thursday morning, August 9th, 2018, Eatonville, Washington. Susan Rainwater, 66 years old, decides to go for a bike ride. It's a beautiful Pacific Northwest morning, the kind where the air is crisp and the sky is clear. She's a mother, a grandmother, a woman who, according to her daughter, spent her entire life helping other people. She climbs onto her bicycle and sets off down State Route 7, pedaling along the shoulder of the road. It's 9:30 in the morning. The sun is high. The road is straight. Visibility is perfect. And then from behind, a vehicle veers out of its lane. No braking, no warning, just the sickening impact of metal and plastic against flesh and bone. Susan Rainwater is thrown from her bicycle. Her body lands in the grass hundreds of feet from where she was hit. The driver doesn't stop, doesn't call for help, doesn't even slow down. He just keeps driving, leaving Susan dying on the side of the road like she was nothing more than a discarded piece of trash. It's hours before anyone finds her. A neighbor, driving by later that afternoon, notices the mangled bicycle in the ditch. And that's when they discover Susan's body, lying in the grass, alone. Her daughter, Leah Miller, would later tell the press she didn't deserve to be left on the side of the road with no one to help her, because all she ever did was help other people. She was loving. She loved me more than anything. The Washington State Patrol responds to the scene. They photograph the bicycle. They search for evidence. And here's what they find. Nothing. No witnesses. No surveillance cameras on this rural stretch of highway. No tire tracks clear enough to identify. No paint transfer on the bicycle that would tell them what kind of vehicle hit her. But there is one piece of evidence, one single clue, a small chunk of black plastic broken off the vehicle during the collision. It's anonymous, generic, the kind of thing that could have come from any one of millions of cars driving American roads. The only distinguishing feature is a tiny U-shaped notch along one side. That's it. That's all they have. Trooper Jonna Batiste, spokesperson for the Washington State Patrol, knows they need help. She knows that traditional investigative methods aren't going to crack this case. So she does something that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. She takes a photograph of the evidence, that small piece of black plastic, and she posts it to Twitter. Troopers and detectives are still looking for a black vehicle believed to be involved in this morning's tragic bicyclist fatality, she tweets. If you know anything regarding this collision, please call the Washington State Patrol. The tweet includes the photo of the plastic piece and also a photo of Susan's mangled bicycle, twisted metal that tells the story of violence and abandonment. The tweet spreads, people retweet it, share it, and eventually someone posts it to Reddit, specifically to a subreddit called r What Is This Thing? For those unfamiliar, r What Is This Thing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a community of over 1 million members dedicated to identifying mysterious objects. People post photos of strange things they find in their attics, weird gadgets discovered at yard sales, peculiar mechanisms that nobody can quite figure out. And the community, filled with experts, hobbyists, mechanics, engineers, and people with oddly specific knowledge, works together to identify them. The photo of Susan Rainwater's plastic piece lands in this community, and within hours, hundreds of people are examining it, debating it, analyzing every millimeter of that anonymous black chunk. Car enthusiasts weigh in. Mechanics offer their expertise. People with decades of experience working on vehicles study the shape, the texture, the U-shaped notch. And then, a user with the handle Jeffsnuts posts a comment that changes everything. Jeff, a Maryland State vehicle inspector, someone who spent years examining thousands of vehicles, someone who knows the intimate details of automotive parts the way most people know their own neighborhoods, looks at that piece of plastic and recognizes it immediately. It's a headlamp bezel, he writes, from a mid-1980s Chevrolet truck, probably a Silverado or a K10 model. He doesn't just make a wild guess, he explains his reasoning, points out specific features, references the manufacturing patterns used by Chevrolet in that era. His confidence is absolute. His knowledge is undeniable. The Reddit community erupts with amazement. How can anyone identify the make, model, and approximate year of a vehicle from a piece of plastic the size of a candy bar? But Jeff knows, because he's looked at thousands of these parts, because he's memorized the details that most people never notice, because he has that rare combination of expertise and visual memory that makes him the perfect person to stumble across this case at this exact moment. Later in an interview, Jeff would admit something fascinating. He first engaged with the case for that all-important internet karma, Reddit's point system that rewards popular posts. It was just another mystery to solve, another opportunity to show off his knowledge in a community that values expertise. He had no idea he was about to help solve a murder. Trooper Batiste sees Jeff's comment. She immediately tweets back, "Thank you. I'll be sharing this with our detectives." And now the investigation has direction. Washington State Patrol starts searching for a 1980s Chevrolet pickup truck with damage to its right side headlight assembly. They pull surveillance footage from nearby businesses. They put out alerts to tow truck operators, body shops, anyone who might have seen a damaged truck matching that description. And then, on Friday, just one day after Susan was killed, police receive an anonymous tip. Someone calls in with a license plate number, a 1986 Chevrolet K10 pickup truck, lifted with front-end damage to the right headlight, exactly as Jeff described. Tuesday, August 14th, 2018. 4 days after Susan Rainwater's death, Washington State Patrol detectives locate the truck, and behind the wheel is Jeremy Simon, a 37-year-old man from the nearby town of Roy, Washington. The damage to his truck is unmistakable. The right side headlight assembly is destroyed. The front corner shows clear evidence of impact. And when detectives examine the vehicle more closely, they find that the broken piece of plastic, the piece posted on Twitter, the piece identified by Jeff on Reddit, fits perfectly into the damaged headlight assembly. Jeremy Simon is arrested on the spot. In the interrogation room, Simon tells his story, and it's almost worse than if he'd done it intentionally. He fell asleep at the wheel, just drifted off, exhausted, driving down that arrow-straight stretch of Route 7. He felt the impact, jolted awake, pulled over to see what he'd hit. He thought it was a mailbox. That's what he told police. He thought he drifted off the road and clipped a mailbox. But then he saw the bicycle, mangled, destroyed, and he knew he'd hit a person. He knew someone was hurt or dead. And instead of stopping, instead of calling for help, instead of trying to see if he could save Susan Rainwater's life, he panicked. He didn't want to see a dead body, prosecutors explained, so he fled, left Susan dying in the grass, drove home, tried to pretend it never happened. When police searched Simon during his arrest, they found a small bag of heroin in his pocket, along with a plastic straw. He's charged with vehicular homicide, hit and run resulting in death, and unlawful possession of a controlled substance. His arraignment is scheduled for Wednesday, August 15th, 2018. He pleads not guilty. His lawyer claims he fell asleep, that it was an accident, that he didn't mean for any of this to happen. But Susan Rainwater is still dead, and her family is still destroyed by a loss that never should have happened. In announcing the arrest, the Washington State Patrol publicly credits Reddit users for solving the case. Trooper Batiste tweets, "WSP detectives made an arrest today for Thursday's fatal bicyclist hit and run in Eatonville. Reddit users identified a photographed broken car part as a mid-1980s Chevy truck headlight assembly. Local anonymous tip confirmed and led to the arrest of a driver of a 1986 Chevy K10. The Reddit community celebrates. Fellow users congratulate Jeff. Someone writes, "Great job, you Jeff's nuts. Doubtless there's a family out there that's grateful for your work bringing closure to this." But Jeff doesn't want the credit. He doesn't want the praise. In an interview later, he says something profound. "I did get a note from a direct relative of Susan who expressed her thanks from the family. The note said something along the lines of, 'We are all distraught here, but at least the husband of 35 years has the satisfaction of knowing the guy was caught. That means more to me than any internet karma.'" Think about that. A Maryland vehicle inspector, scrolling through Reddit during what was probably his lunch break, identified a piece of plastic from a photograph and helped bring a killer to justice. He didn't do it for fame. He didn't do it for reward. He did it because he could, because he had knowledge that could help, because someone asked a question and he knew the answer. And in doing so, he gave a grieving family, a husband of 35 years, daughters, grandchildren, the one thing they needed most, answers. Susan Rainwater's case shows us something important about the democratization of expertise in the digital age. We live in a world where specialized knowledge is no longer locked away in professional institutions. A vehicle inspector in Maryland can help solve a hit and run in Washington. An Australian woman can identify a dead teenager in Virginia. The barriers of geography, of professional hierarchy, of institutional gatekeeping, they're collapsing. And when they collapse, justice can flow into spaces it never reached before. But what happens when the forgotten aren't just forgotten by investigators? What happens when a clerical error literally erases someone from every database, every system, every record that might help identify them? Coming up next, the story of a skeleton buried in a pauper's grave, a college student doing genealogy research, and a forensic artist who refused to give up even when the case seemed impossible. September 1st, 1974. 4 o'clock in the morning. Akron, Ohio. 17-year-old Linda Pagano is in the middle of a screaming match with her stepfather, Byron Claflin. She'd come home late from a concert. He's furious. She's defiant. The argument escalates. And finally, Claflin does what angry stepfathers have done for generations. He tells her to get out. Leave. Go. And Linda does. She storms out of the apartment on Carnegie Avenue, 4'10", 100 pounds, 17 years old and so angry she's shaking. Her car's in the parking lot, but for some reason, maybe Claflin took her keys, maybe she's too upset to think straight, she doesn't drive. She walks into the darkness of a pre-dawn morning in 1974, and she's never seen alive again. 5 months later, February 5th, 1975. Strongsville, Ohio. 3 boys are hiking through Millstream Run Reservation, a park along the Rocky River. It's winter, the trees are bare, the ground is hard with frost, and there, on the riverbank, they find bones. Not a complete skeleton, just parts, heavily weathered. The jawbone is missing. Much of the skeleton has been scattered by animals or erosion or time. But it's clearly human, clearly female, and clearly the victim of violence. The Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office responds. They recover what's left of the remains. And here's what they determine. White female. Approximately 20 years old, though this is just an estimate based on bone development. Cause of death, a gunshot wound to the left temple. A small caliber bullet, probably .25 caliber, which fits snugly in the hole in her skull. Homicide. No question. But who is she? In 1975, the tools for identifying unknown remains are primitive compared to what we have today. No DNA databases. No national missing persons registries. No internet where information can be shared instantly across jurisdictions. Just local police departments, paper files, and the hope that someone, somewhere, reported this woman missing. The Strongsville police try. They really do. They run the case in local newspapers. They check missing persons reports. At one point, they even consider whether the remains might belong to Patty Hearst. the heiress who'd been kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army in 1974 and was still missing. But Hearst is found alive months later, and the lead evaporates. And here's where the tragedy deepens. Linda Pagano's brother Michael sees a TV broadcast about the unidentified body. Something about it clicks. The timing, the location. Strongsville is less than an hour from Akron. The fact that his sister disappeared around the same time. He calls the Strongsville police. "I think it might be my sister," he tells them. "Linda Pagano. She went missing in September." But the police dismiss him. They tell him the victim is too old, probably too tall. It can't be Linda. Michael hangs up the phone, and Linda remains unidentified. With no one to claim her, no family to mourn her, no name to put on a headstone, the skeleton is buried in Potter's Field, the pauper's grave at a Cleveland cemetery. The place where the forgotten, the unclaimed, the nameless are laid to rest. Her official designation, unknown white female bones. Case number 82483. And then comes the clerical error that would keep Linda Pagano forgotten for another 4 decades. Someone, maybe overworked, maybe undertrained, maybe just exhausted by the endless parade of death that flows through a medical examiner's office, makes a spelling mistake when entering the case into the records. A small error, the kind of typo that happens 1,000 times a day in offices across America. But this typo has consequences, because it means that when new databases are created, when the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, is established in 2007 to help match missing people with unidentified remains. Linda's case isn't entered. The spelling error prevents the automatic migration of her records. She falls through the cracks of digitization. She's not just forgotten by people. She's forgotten by the very systems designed to remember the forgotten. Fast forward to 2016, 42 years after Linda disappeared, 41 years after her remains were found. Christina Skates, a college student at Cleveland State University, is working on a genealogy project. She's researching her own family history, digging through cemetery records, learning about the people buried in Cleveland's various graveyards. And that's when she sees it, line 82483 in a cemetery ledger. 4 words that stop her cold. Unknown white female bones. "It was in the back of my mind for a couple months every day, thinking this isn't right," Skates later tells reporters. "This isn't how things should be. That's why I looked into it further than I originally did." She's curious, haunted by those 4 words. Who was this woman? Why doesn't anyone know her name? Skates starts investigating. She files a Freedom of Information Act request with the Strongsville police, asking for the case file. When it arrives, she's shocked by what she finds. Photographs of a muddy skeleton, sparse forensic reports, evidence of a murder investigation that just stopped, and absolutely nothing in any missing persons database. This woman has been erased from institutional memory. Skates does what any digitally native college student would do in 2016. She goes online. She posts her findings to Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries forum. She posts to Websleuths.com, a website dedicated to solving cold cases and identifying unknown remains. She shares the photographs, the case details, everything she's learned. And she asks the question that will change everything. Can anyone help identify this woman? The response is immediate. Hundreds of people view her posts, dozens comment. Armchair detectives across the country start digging through missing persons reports from 1974 and 1975, trying to find matches. The case spreads across the internet. Facebook groups pick it up. True crime communities share it, and eventually it reaches exactly the right person. Carl Koppelman, a forensic artist from California, an accountant by trade who, in his spare time, creates digital reconstructions of unidentified remains. He's a regular on Websleuths, spending up to 12 hours a day helping to identify the forgotten dead. When Carl sees Skates' post, he's intrigued, but he's also skeptical. The photos she's obtained are terrible. Muddy skeleton, missing jawbone, no hair color information. Most of the front teeth are gone. The angle is wrong for reconstruction work. "I looked at that for a couple of months," Carl later tells the Washington Post. "I thought, no, the angle's wrong. There's no mandible, no hair color. The front teeth are all missing. There's no way I can do anything with this. But eventually I came along and said, what the hell, I'll give it a shot. He starts working. Using Corel photo paint software, he begins with a model photo of a living person who has similar bone structure to the skeleton. Then he meticulously overlays the forensic details, adjusting for decomposition, for missing elements, for all the things that death does to a human face. It takes multiple drafts, dozens of attempts. But eventually, Carl creates something remarkable. A digital reconstruction that shows what unknown white female bones might have looked like when she was alive. In June 2016, Carl has a phone call with the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office about a completely different case. And almost as an afterthought, he mentions the Strongsville Jane Doe reconstruction he's been working on with Christina Skates. And Jeanette Fisher, the office's missing persons liaison, is immediately interested. And she's horrified to learn that this case, a murder victim from 1975, has never been entered into NamUs. She rectifies the error immediately. Within days, the Strongsville Jane Doe case is uploaded to the national database. And that's when the dominoes start falling. A few months later, Sergeant Jeff Smith of the Akron Police Department's Missing Persons Unit is assigned to work on cold cases. The oldest in his pile, Linda Pagano, the 17-year-old who disappeared after an argument with her stepfather in September 1974 and was never seen again. Smith decides to be thorough. He uploads Linda's missing person report to NamUs, just to see if there are any unidentified remains from that time period that might match. And there it is. Strongsville Jane Doe, white female, found February 1975, just a few months after Linda disappeared. Found less than an hour from where Linda went missing. Approximately the right age, shot in the head. Smith contacts the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner. Dental records are requested. And even with limited dental information remaining after 40 years, there's enough for a tentative match. In December 2016, the Akron Police Department officially reaches out to Cuyahoga County about the possible match. Over the next several months, law enforcement officials, city officials, and medical examiners meet to discuss exhumation. Digging up a body buried for 42 years isn't a simple decision. It's expensive. It's time-consuming. And there's always the possibility that the remains won't yield usable DNA. But the family, Linda's brother Michael, who spent 4 decades wondering what happened to his sister, gives them the push they need. In October 2017, the exhumation is performed. The remains are carefully extracted from Potter's Field. DNA samples are taken, and then comes the waiting. Months of laboratory analysis. Months of hoping that 42 years in the ground haven't degraded the biological material beyond usability. And finally, on July 12, 2018, the answer comes. Positive match. Unknown white female bones is Linda Marie Pagano, 17 years old when she died. Born and raised in Akron, a student at Springfield High School, a girl who got into one argument too many with her stepfather and paid for it with her life. At the press conference announcing the identification, Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner Thomas Gilson stands at a podium and says the words that Linda's family has waited 44 years to hear. We have identified finally the victim of that tragedy. Linda's brother Michael is there. He's in his 60s now. His parents, Cheryl and Mike Pagano, died without ever knowing what happened to their daughter. They died with that hole in their hearts, that unanswered question that must have haunted every quiet moment of their lives. But Michael knows now, and the relief mixed with the grief, mixed with the rage at all the lost years, is overwhelming. I thought I was in a dream, Michael tells reporters. I thought I would never see this. I thought this day would never come. I thought I would die wondering. I am amazed how this came to light like it did. He looks at Carl Koppelman's facial reconstruction next to a photograph of Linda when she was alive. The mouth is practically identical, he says, staring in awe. Christina Skates, the college student who started this entire chain of events by being curious about 4 words in a cemetery ledger, is overwhelmed by what she's helped accomplish. I just felt an empty pit. I knew, she says when the identification is confirmed. She helped turn one of the biggest mysteries in Northeast Ohio into a closing chapter of a long-forgotten tragedy. Linda Pagano's case reveals something profound about institutional failure and collective action. The systems designed to help, police departments, medical examiners, databases, failed Linda completely. A clerical error kept her from being identified for decades. Her own brother's tip was dismissed. Her remains were buried and forgotten. But the internet doesn't forget. A college student doing genealogy research stumbles across an anomaly and can't let it go. A forensic artist in California spends months working on a reconstruction that seems impossible. A Reddit community amplifies the signal. A Websleuths forum keeps the case alive. And eventually, justice finds its way through the cracks. The murder remains unsolved. Byron Claflin, Linda's stepfather, died in 1990 without ever being charged. We may never know for certain what happened in those hours after Linda stormed out of the apartment. But at least now she has her name back. At least now she's not unknown white female bones buried in Potter's Field. At least now her brother can mourn her properly, can visit her grave, can finally have the closure that was stolen from his family for 44 years. 3 cases down, 2 to go. And what we're seeing is a pattern. Social media doesn't just help solve cases. It forces institutions to care about the people they've forgotten. It democratizes justice. It gives voices to the voiceless and names to the nameless. Up next, what happens when a decades-old murder is solved because someone scrolls through Facebook comments and recognizes a name from their past? Stay with us for Case 4, when social media posts become confessions. October 23, 1971, 10:40 p.m., Manor Country Club, Rockville, Maryland. A man lies face down in the southeast parking lot. Blood pools beneath his head where a single bullet entered his left temple. His name is James Tappan Hall, JT to his friends and family. He's 53 years old, a Montgomery County Special Deputy Sheriff, a father of 2, a grandfather who shows up with gallons of milk during snowstorms because he knows people need help. And tonight he interrupted a burglary. Someone broke into a home on nearby Beverly Road. Hall, working part-time security at the country club, must have seen the suspect carrying stolen property across the parking lot. There was a confrontation. Words were exchanged. And then the burglar pulled a gun and shot Hall in the head. Hall was rushed to the hospital. He held on for 3 days, fighting for his life. But on October 26, 1971, James Tappan Hall died from his injuries. And for 51 years, his killer walked free. Investigators tried everything in 1971. They interviewed potential suspects. They followed leads. They collected evidence, including an old reel-to-reel tape recording that captured crucial details about the crime. But this was 1971. Forensic technology was primitive. Databases didn't exist. And eventually, the trail went cold. The case file gathered dust. Detectives retired. New generations of officers joined the force, and Hall's family, his daughter Carolyn Falo in Texas, his son Melvin in Virginia, his nephew Frank Hall, who became a Montgomery County Police Corporal, lived with the unanswered question, who killed JT? Fast forward to October 2021, the 50th anniversary of Captain Hall's murder. Detective Kay Leggett and Corporal L. Killen from the Cold Case Unit decide to take another look at the case. Not because there's new evidence, not because a witness has come forward, but simply because it's been 50 years and the case deserves fresh eyes. They pull the boxes from storage, page through yellowed reports, listen to that old reel-to-reel tape from 1971, and they start noticing things the original investigators might have missed. One name keeps appearing in the files. Larry David Becker, 19 years old at the time of the murder, lived near the country club, had a criminal history, burglary, assault, shoplifting, escape. In 1973, 2 years after Hall's murder, Becker was interviewed by investigators, but he was never labeled as a suspect. The investigation moved on without him. Leggett and Killen dig deeper. They run Becker's name through every database they can access. And here's where things get interesting. Larry David Becker doesn't exist anymore. Well, he exists, but around 1975, just a few years after Hall's murder, Becker changed his last name to Smith, Larry David Smith, and he moved to Little Falls, New York, where he's been living for over 45 years. Investigators believe that this was done purposefully to avoid any further investigation into his involvement in this offense, the detectives later write in court papers. But how do you find someone who changed their name nearly 50 years ago and moved to a different state? How do you track down a person who's been living under a different identity for longer than most people have been alive? This is where the story gets fascinating, because somewhere in the course of their investigation, the detectives start looking at social media. They're searching for information about Larry David Becker, Larry David Smith, anyone connected to the case. They're looking at Facebook profiles, comments, posts, anything that might give them a clue about where this man has been living for the past 5 decades. And they find it. Facebook comments from a resident in Little Falls, New York, someone who mentions going to high school in Aspen Hill, Maryland, the same area where Larry David Becker grew up, someone whose timeline and geographic history match the person they're looking for. It's the digital breadcrumb they need, the connection that bridges 51 years and 300 miles. Because Larry David Smith never imagined that casual Facebook comments, posts about his youth, reminiscences about his old neighborhood, would lead detectives right to his door. September 1st, 2022, Little Falls, New York. Detective Leggett and Corporal Killen drive to Smith's apartment building. It's a high-rise, quiet, the kind of place where a 71-year-old man lives an unremarkable life. His neighbors describe him as someone who kept to himself. To me, that's not Larry, one neighbor, June Jones, would later say when she learned of the arrest. She couldn't believe the quiet man on her floor was a murderer. The detectives knock on Smith's door, and when he answers, they ask him about a night in 1971, about a country club parking lot, about a deputy sheriff who died 3 days after being shot in the head. And Larry David Smith confesses. He admits to shooting James Tappan Hall. He claims it was accidental that Hall confronted him as he was carrying stolen property from the burglary back to a getaway vehicle. A gun went off. Hall fell, and Smith ran. He ran all the way to New York, changed his name, built a new life. And for 51 years, he lived with the secret that he'd killed a law enforcement officer. Smith is arrested on the spot, charged with first-degree murder. He waives extradition and is transported back to Maryland by the end of that week. On September 7th, 2022, Montgomery County Police Chief Marcus Jones holds a press conference. Hall's children, Carolyn and Melvin, are there. Other family members stand with them, and Chief Jones announces what they've waited 51 years to hear. We got him. To obtain a confession from someone who committed a crime 51 years ago is a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment, Jones says. For Jones, the case is particularly personal. James Tappan Hall's nephew, Corporal Frank Hall, was Jones's training officer when he joined the force 36 years ago. To come full circle, to really kind of bring this home for me is personal. It's personal in a different kind of way, Jones explains. The Hall family stands at the press conference, grateful and grieving all over again. Their father, their grandfather, the man who brought them milk during snowstorms, he finally has justice. State's Attorney John McCarthy says Smith faces a life term in prison if convicted. A bond review hearing is scheduled. The case moves forward to a grand jury. But here's what's remarkable about this case. Without social media, Larry David Smith might have remained invisible forever. He changed his name. He moved to a different state. He lived quietly for 45 years. The traditional methods of investigation, interviewing witnesses, following paper trails, could only take detectives so far. But Facebook comments, those casual digital footprints we leave when we reminisce about where we grew up, where we went to school, the neighborhoods we remember, those became the map that led investigators to a killer. Larry David Smith forgot that the internet remembers, that every comment, every post, every digital interaction leaves a trace, that you can change your name, but you can't erase your past when it's written in ones and zeros across social media platforms. James Tappan Hall's case is the oldest cold case ever solved by the Montgomery County Police Department, and it was solved in part because a killer couldn't resist talking about his youth on Facebook. One more case to go, and this one is perhaps the most complex of all. What happens when a woman steals the identity of a dead child, lives under that false name for decades, and then dies by suicide, leaving behind a husband and daughter who have no idea who she really was. Coming up, the mystery of Lori Erica Ruff and how a 2013 newspaper article sparked a global investigation that took 3 years to solve. Christmas Eve 2010, Longview, Texas. A woman named Lori Erica Kennedy Ruff sits in her car in the driveway of her former in-laws' home. She's 42 years old, recently divorced, the mother of a 2-year-old daughter, and she's about to end her life with a single gunshot. No note, no explanation, just a lockbox hidden in her closet that contains documents her family has never seen before. Documents that will launch one of the most perplexing identity investigations in recent American history. Because Lori Erica Ruff isn't who anyone thought she was. After Lori's suicide, her ex-husband Blake Ruff and his family begin sorting through her belongings. They're grieving, confused, trying to understand why the woman they knew, secretive, protective, intensely private, chose to take her own life. And then they find the lockbox. Inside, a birth certificate for someone named Becky Sue Turner, born July 18, 1969, in Bakersfield, California. Court documents showing a legal name change from Becky Sue Turner to Lori Erica Kennedy in Dallas, July 5, 1988. A social security card, an Idaho state ID. Blake Ruff stares at these documents because Becky Sue Turner isn't just another name his wife used. Becky Sue Turner was a 2-year-old girl who died in a house fire in Fife, Washington in 1971, almost 40 years before Lori's suicide. His wife had stolen a dead child's identity. But if Lori wasn't Becky Sue Turner and she wasn't Lori Erica Kennedy from the start, then who was she? Joe Velling, a Social Security Administration investigator, takes on the case. He's a seasoned government sleuth with decades of experience tracking identity thieves and fraudsters. But this case is different. Most identity thieves steal identities to access credit, to commit fraud, to facilitate immigration. They leave trails. They make mistakes. Lori Erica Ruff did none of those things. She stole Becky Sue Turner's identity with spy-like sophistication, changed her name legally, obtained a social security number, earned a GED, then a college degree from the University of Texas at Arlington, got married, had a child through IVF, lived a seemingly normal suburban life. She didn't use the stolen identity to commit crimes. She used it to disappear. She created a false identity for the sole purpose of getting lost in America, Velling explains. She wanted a complete break from her past. By changing her name, she created a clean identity, a person with no past. But who was she running from? An abusive family? A crime? A witness protection program? The theories multiplied, but the answers remained elusive. Velling investigates for 3 years. He follows every lead, interviews everyone who knew Lori, studies her habits, her mannerisms, her speech patterns for clues about where she might have grown up. He compares her to missing persons reports from the 1980s. He looks at dental records, scars, birthmarks. Nothing. Every lead hits a dead end. It's like Lori Erica Ruff materialized fully formed in 1988 with no connection to anyone or anything before that date. In 2013, frustrated and hoping for a breakthrough, Velling contacts a reporter he knows at the Seattle Times. The reporter, Maureen O'Hagan, writes a feature article about the case titled, "Who is Jane Doe?" The article runs on the front page, and then something extraordinary happens. It goes viral. Publications around the world pick up the story. Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries forum explodes with discussion. Websleuths.com dedicates entire threads to solving the mystery. Facebook groups form around identifying Lori Ruff. Thousands of people, amateur detectives from dozens of countries, start examining her photos, analyzing her features, comparing her to missing persons databases. For 3 years, this massive online community pores over every detail of Lori's life. They create elaborate theories. They compare her facial structure to missing women from the 1980s. They map out possible geographic origins based on tiny clues. The investigation becomes crowdsourced on a scale never seen before. But still, no one can identify her. And then, in late 2015, A woman named Colleen Fitzpatrick sees the case online. Colleen is a former nuclear physicist who worked on lasers and optics for 25 years. People used to ask what I did for a living, she recalls. I'd say I shine light on things. But in the early 2000s, Colleen pivoted. She became a forensic genealogist, essentially creating an entirely new field that combines DNA analysis, traditional genealogy research, and modern database searching to solve identity mysteries. She's helped Holocaust survivors find family members. She's helped adoptees discover their birth parents, and she's solved numerous cases of unidentified remains. When she sees the Lori Ruff case, she knows immediately that the online sleuths are approaching it wrong. They're comparing photos. They're looking at missing persons reports. But Lori was so thorough in erasing her past that those methods will never work. Colleen needs DNA. Blake Ruff and his daughter, Lori's biological child, agreed to take DNA tests through direct-to-consumer companies like 23, andme, and Ancestry.com. These companies analyze DNA and identify potential relatives based on genetic matches. Colleen uses a technique called genetic genealogy phasing. Essentially, she takes Blake's DNA results and subtracts them from the daughter's DNA results. What's left? Lori's genetic profile. She uploads this profile to the databases, and she starts getting matches. Distant cousins, third cousins, people who share small segments of DNA with Lori but don't know who she is. One match stands out, Michael Cassidy, a first cousin match. But Cassidy is an incredibly common name, and this particular cousin isn't responsive to messages. For 2 years, Colleen works the case. She builds family trees. She traces genealogical lines backward and forward. She contacts potential relatives. And finally, in 2015, she finds what she's looking for, a third cousin match who is related to the Cassidys through a different branch of the family tree. And that third cousin knows exactly who the Cassidys are. Colleen contacts Joe Velling, who's since retired from the Social Security Administration. She tells him, I think Lori Ruff is from a family back east, the Cassidys, from Philadelphia. Velling books a flight to Pennsylvania. He has no official authority anymore. He's retired. He's just a former government employee with a suit and a hunch. He locates a member of the Cassidy family and shows up at their workplace. Do you have a moment for me to tell you a story? He asks. He starts explaining. The identity theft, the stolen name, the mystery woman in Texas, the DNA results, the great-great-grandfather they all share. But the story is so convoluted, so unbelievable, that the relative seems confused. So Velling pulls out photographs. He lays them on the table one by one. Lori as a young woman, Lori in middle age, and finally, Lori's most recent driver's license photo, taken when she was about 40 years old. The relative sees that photo, and the hair on the back of Joe Velling's neck stands up as he watches recognition flood the person's face. My God, the relative says, that's Kimberly. Kimberly McLean, born October 16, 1968 in Wynwood, Pennsylvania, daughter of James McLean and Deanne Cassidy. The couple divorced when Kimberly was in her teens. Her mother remarried a man named Robert Becker and moved the family to Wyncote. Kimberly attended Bishop McDevitt High School. She reportedly had a difficult time adjusting to the new environment. She didn't get along with her mother and stepfather, and in the fall of 1986, just after turning 18, Kimberly McLean moved out, cut off all contact with her family, and disappeared. Her mother, Deanne, assumed Kimberly would call when she was ready, that she'd reach out eventually, that she was alive somewhere, living her life. For 30 years, Deanne hoped her daughter would come home. She never knew that Kimberly had become Becky Sue Turner, that Becky Sue Turner had become Lori Erica Kennedy, that Lori Erica Kennedy had married Blake Ruff, that she'd had a daughter, that she'd built an entirely new life based on a dead child's identity. And she never knew that on Christmas Eve 2010, Kimberly had ended her own life. Deanne McLean takes a DNA test. The results come back. Positive match. Lori Erica Ruff is Kimberly McLean. 6 years after her death, the mystery is finally solved. Think about what this means. Two families on opposite sides of the country, connected by one woman's desperate need to escape her past. In Texas, Blake Ruff and his daughter learned that the woman they loved, the wife, the mother, was never really who she said she was. Every story she told about her past was a lie. Her parents weren't dead. She wasn't from Arizona. Her father wasn't a failed stockbroker. Everything was fiction. In Pennsylvania, Deanne McClain learns that her daughter, the girl she'd been hoping would come home for 30 years, had been alive all that time, living under false names. Just a phone call away, but unreachable because Kimberly had severed every connection to her former life. The questions multiply. Why did Kimberly run? Was it really just teenage angst about her parents' divorce? Was there abuse, trauma, something darker? We'll likely never know. Kimberly took those answers with her. But here's what's remarkable about this case. It took the collaboration of thousands of people to solve it. A Seattle Times reporter who wrote a compelling article that went viral. Thousands of web sleuths who kept the case alive in online forums for 3 years. A forensic genealogist who approached the problem from a completely different angle than everyone else. Direct-to-consumer DNA companies that made genetic testing accessible to ordinary people. A retired federal investigator who refused to give up. And all of it coordinated through social media and online communities. Reddit threads with hundreds of thousands of views, Facebook groups dedicated to identifying Jane Doe, Websleuths forums where experts and amateurs collaborated on theories and evidence. Without that viral Seattle Times article, the case might have remained unsolved forever. Without the DNA testing companies, Colleen Fitzpatrick couldn't have traced Lori's genetic lineage. Without the online communities keeping the case in the public eye, Colleen might never have heard about it. Lori Erica Ruff's true identity was discovered because the internet refused to let her remain nameless. Because social media created a space where thousands of people could work together toward a common goal. Because one woman's desperate attempt to disappear couldn't survive the collective determination of strangers who believed she deserved to be known. Kimberly McClain's name had been removed from federal databases of missing and unidentified persons. Blake Ruff's daughter now knows her mother's real name, her real family, her real history, and somewhere the McClain and Cassidy families in Pennsylvania are still processing the grief of learning that Kimberly was alive for 30 years and never reached out. It's a tragedy, but it's also a testament to what we can accomplish when we refuse to let someone be forgotten. 5 cases, 5 decades, 5 times when ordinary people, armed with nothing but curiosity and an internet connection, helped solve mysteries that professional investigators couldn't crack. Jason Patrick Callahan, forgotten for 20 years, until an Australian woman created a subreddit. Susan Rainwater, killed by a hit-and-run driver, identified through a piece of plastic in a Maryland vehicle inspector's Reddit comment. Linda Pagano, buried as unknown white female bones, until a college student couldn't ignore 4 words in a cemetery ledger. James Tappan Hall, murdered in 1971, and forgotten until Facebook comments led detectives to his killer's door. Kimberly McClain, who became Lori Erica Ruff and remained nameless for 6 years after death, until forensic genealogy in a viral article revealed her identity. These stories teach us something profound about the age we're living in. We carry extraordinary power in our pockets. The phones we use to scroll mindlessly through social media, the apps we use to stay connected with friends, the forums where we discuss our interests and hobbies. These tools are also weapons against injustice. They democratize expertise. A vehicle inspector in Maryland can solve a hit and run in Washington. A forensic artist in California can identify remains buried in Ohio. An Australian woman can give a name to a dead teenager in Virginia. They break down geographical barriers. Distance doesn't matter anymore. A case in Texas can be solved by someone in Pennsylvania. A murder in Maryland can be cracked through Facebook posts. The world has become smaller, and justice has become more accessible. They preserve memory. Before the internet, cold cases died when the original investigators retired. Files gathered dust. Victims were forgotten. But now, online communities keep these cases alive. Subreddits dedicated to unidentified remains. Websleuths forums where people spend thousands of hours examining evidence. Facebook groups that refuse to let the nameless stay nameless. And that brings me to the promise I made at the beginning of this video. The thing that could turn you from a passive viewer into an active participant in solving cold cases. Here it is. You already have everything you need to help solve a cold case. You don't need a degree in forensic science. You don't need to be a detective. You don't need special training or access to exclusive databases. You just need to care enough to look, to join online communities like UnresolvedMysteries or r/GratefulDoe on Reddit, to follow Websleuths forums, to share posts about unidentified remains or missing persons, to use your specific expertise, whether that's vehicle identification, genealogy research, facial recognition, or any of 1,000 other specialized skills, when it might help. Every one of the cases we covered today was solved because someone who had no professional obligation to care decided to care anyway. They saw a post, they read an article, they couldn't let it go, and they used whatever skills or knowledge they had to help. That could be you. There are thousands of Jane and John Does across America right now. Thousands of cold cases, thousands of families waiting for answers. And somewhere, someone has the piece of knowledge that could crack the case wide open. Someone knows something. Someone recognizes something. Someone has a skill that could help. Maybe that someone is you. If these stories have moved you, if you believe that every victim deserves justice and every cold case deserves a second look, here's what I want you to do. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release new deep dive investigations every week, and we're building a community of people who believe that justice delayed doesn't have to be justice denied. Second, share this video. Every share increases the chance that someone with crucial knowledge about a cold case will see it. Social media is only powerful when we use it to amplify important messages. Third, consider joining online communities dedicated to solving cold cases. Even if you just lurk and read, you're contributing to keeping these cases in the public consciousness. And if you have specialized knowledge, if you're a mechanic, a genealogist, an artist, a historian, whatever, that knowledge might be exactly what's needed to solve a case. And finally, if you found value in this deep dive, hit that like button. It helps the algorithm show this content to more people, which means more eyes on these important stories. Thank you for watching Criminal Minds Archives. Thank you for caring about the forgotten. Thank you for believing that every life matters enough to fight for justice. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, you have more power to change lives than you think.